Congressman Hamilton, Iran-Gate has been pushed off the front pages with the embassy bugging wars and the scandal regarding the Marine Guards. Do you think there will be renewed interest and public support for your congressional hearings regarding Iran-Gate?
I think we're in kind of a quiet phase now as we complete the rather painstaking investigation that's been going forward. And when the public hearings begin on May 5th, we'll see a resurgence of interest in the Iran-Gate story.
How important is this scandal? You've been in Congress many years. And how would you rate it in respect to Watergate and other national scandals?
I don't try to make comparisons. I do think this is a very serious matter. What happened in brief was that the United States was saying to all the world that we were doing one thing, when in fact we were doing quite the opposite secretly. We were telling all the world that we were following a policy of not dealing with terrorists and not making concessions to terrorists, when in fact we were doing just those things. We were telling the world that we were neutral in the war in the Gulf, when in fact we were supplying arms to one side. Now that goes to the credibility of the United States. It goes to the question of how much confidence they have in what we say, and those are serious matters for the United States.
Yet we read and hear reports from Europe that they don't attach a great deal of importance to what was done in the Iran-Gate affair.
It depends on what leaders you talk to. The United States, for example, has had a very serious disruption in its contacts with and conversations with the so-called moderate Arab countries because they no longer trust our word. Other leaders don't take it as seriously. So you get a mixed reaction in the world. But I don't think there's much doubt about the fact that the United States has been harmed internationally by this incident. That's not to the advantage of any American. We want to correct the problems that existed and move on to other matters.
Do you think there's any soundness in the policy of President Reagan in wanting to open avenues with Iran?
Oh, I think that's a good policy. I would commend the President for wanting to make an opening to this country of Iran, which has been a terrible burden for us in recent years. The difference I think I would have with the President is the means by which he chose to do that. I do not think he should have chosen the means of selling arms to Iran. I think there were a lot of other alternatives open to him to make that opening. Economic moves, diplomatic moves, that would have been preferable.
How far has your committee traced the financial aspect of this Iran?
That's really the key question. We wanted very much to get hold of the bank records. I think that would be the best evidence of what happened to the money. Unfortunately, those bank records are controlled by the Swiss government, and we've not had the cooperation we'd like in getting those bank records. So we're going to have to try to trace the records through the testimony of individuals who participated in the accounts. And I think we'll get a reasonable understanding. But I think it is important to note that with all of our media attention that has been given to this, with all of the investigation done by the Congress, we still don't know what happened to that money. And we've got tens of millions of dollars floating around, and we don't know what happened to it.
You know exactly how much?
No, I don't know exactly how much. I've seen the estimates. They run from 10 million to 90 million. I can't be precise about that. I don't know at this point how much is missing. Some of that money, a lot of that money, I think, belongs to the American taxpayer.
The Swiss government in recent years has relaxed some of its policy in respect to access to these records. And since the money is government money, U.S. government money, and you are representing the U.S. government in this affair, I'm surprised that they would be so adamant about opening the records to you.
Well, first, it's not just a matter of getting access, but it's how quickly you can get access. I'm told by my lawyer friends who know a lot more about this than I do that it takes a long time to get hold of those records, and we're, of course, under some real time constraints, so that's a factor. Secondly, this money was not money put in a U.S. account. It was money put in under the name of corporations and individuals. Now, they may have been acting as agents of the United States government. That's not crystal clear at this point. But it's not the same thing as just having U.S. government money accounts there. Lake Resources, for example, the corporation controlled one of the accounts. That's not a government corporation. That complicates our problems.
Do you think at this point that Admiral Poindexter and Colonel North will reveal this information under limited immunity?
I just don't know what Admiral Poindexter and Colonel North are going to say. I have no information on that that I consider reliable. Washington is rife with rumors about what Poindexter is saying and what North is saying, but they haven't said it to me yet. They haven't said it to our investigators, and I'm not going to try to speculate on it.
It's not on record until they do.
That's exactly right.
Where the money went, of course, is the most important unanswered question, as you've just said. In order of importance, what are some of the other answers you'll be looking for?
Well, I think the money records and the President's knowledge, obviously, are the two critical questions that are involved. But there are very serious questions of policy process involved here. How did this policy keep going? What are the dynamics of it when the Secretary of State was against it, when the Secretary of Defense was against it, when Bud McFarlane, the National Security Advisor, got up several times from the table and said the whole effort is dead, but it kept moving forward. What are the dynamics of that? We don't really understand that very well. We've got a lot of questions about process here. Why did the process break down? How was it that a colonel on the National Security Council staff was telling the Director of Central Intelligence what to do? How was it that that colonel was calling up the President of Costa Rica and saying to him, we're going to cut your aid off? The process really broke down, and we don't understand that as well as we'd like to, and we want to make suggestions as to how that process can be strengthened.
Do you plan on calling the President to testify, and is there a precedent for presidents testifying?
At the moment, I would say it's not likely that the President would testify. There is only one precedent that I know about, and that one was when President Gerald Ford went to the Congress voluntarily on his own initiative to testify to the Congress about the reasons he gave a pardon to former President Nixon. I don't think, unless the President would choose himself to come voluntarily, that we would ask him to testify. We will see the President's private records. We may have an opportunity to talk with him about it. We'll just see how that develops. I think it's unlikely that he would testify.
When do your committee hearings begin?
May the 5th.
Let's move from the Iran-Gate scandal and the committee hearings. Your expertise in Congress is in the area of foreign affairs. And I'd like to ask your comments on the recent bugging war, and very briefly, and how it is affecting or could affect Secretary Shultz's visit and negotiations with the Russians on arms reduction.
I don't think any person who has worked closely in national security affairs should be startled by information that the Russians are bugging us or that we are bugging them. It's a part of the international scene. It's not the most pleasant aspect of international affairs, but neither should it surprise us. What the Russians did, of course, in Moscow, we simply cannot tolerate. And we must make clear to them that it's got to stop. But I don't think the dialogue between the two nations on arms control, as critically important as that is, should stop just because you have a serious problem with the Soviets on the security side. If you always wait for the perfect atmosphere in order to sit down and talk about arms control, you will never sit down to talk about arms control because there are always going to be problems between us and the Soviets.
Do you think this is that an arms reduction agreement is imminent and there's a possibility of?
I think it is possible. I think it depends on the President of the United States. Can he, in the remaining months of his presidency, overcome the disarray in his administration on arms control policy and say, and knock some heads together, if you will, and say, this is the way it's going to be? He has a chance. I believe He wants to do it. I think he's quite sincere about that. I also think Mr. Gorbachev is sincere about it, and that we have now a rare opportunity, doesn't come along very often in U.S.-Soviet relations, when both sides are prepared to move forward on arms control. I very much hope that Mr. Reagan succeeds in that effort. I think it's important for all of us that he does.